Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the PREdiCCt IBD podcast. Today, what do we have for you today? Well, today we have Lisa Derr, trial manager extraordinaire, Kate Covil, research nurse of the century, and Lee Murphy in charge of all the lab processing for PREdiCCt. So, wow, what a responsible job that is. And what they're going to talk about today is the nitty-gritty of samples for PREdiCCt. What do you really have to do? How are the samples generated? Yes. How are they generated? How do they get in the pots? What happens to the pots afterwards? Really, really important know-how bits of information. So let's hear from those guys. First, of course, just a quick flag for the study sponsors. That is Cure Crohn's and Colitis, 3CS, and the Chief Scientist Office here in Scotland. Thank you guys for making the study possible. So Lisa, Kate, and Lee, let's hear what you've got to have to say.
So Lee, when I give the PREdiCCt sample pack out to the patients, often the first question is, why am I doing 3 samples? And how do they go about doing these samples? Because usually when they come to clinic, they're asked to give 1 sample, which is calprotectin, but now they're doing 3. So could you tell us a bit about why we're asking for the 3 samples and what they are?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first one to start with is the calprotectin sample. So the aim there is to measure the calprotectin amount in the stool sample. We're doing that within the NHS labs, just as they would normally in the clinic. And that's so that we've got a baseline data on the patient and we kind of know how much inflammation is there at the start of the study. The other 2 stool samples are then for looking at the microbiome. So that's for looking at what bacteria and virus and fungi is in the stool sample. And working with stool samples is really complicated. And it's really, we're using 2 different buffers to try and stabilize the stool sample. And we're doing 2 samples because it's not clear really in the field, in the literature, about what is the best way of storing stool samples and working with them. So we've taken we've kind of gone on the safe side and we're taking 2 samples at the moment. So the first sample is the blue top tube with a red dot on, and it has a buffer in there. The buffer's called RNA-later. And that's just really keeping the stool sample stable so that it can be sent to the lab at room temperature. So the important thing there is that we just get a small amount of stool in there, about a pea size. And we want the buffer to touch all of the stool, so we don't want to overload the tube. The other tube then is the omnigut tube, so that's the longer, thin tube with a purple lid. And that is just a different buffer again. And so that tube is really nice because it's designed to only take a small amount of stool. You put it in the top, screw the lid on, give it a really good shake. The stool sample goes into the buffer. There's some beads in there, and that helps break up the stool sample and allows that buffer to really kind of get around the sample and stabilize it.
So this buffer, the liquid that are in 2 of the tubes, is that harmful? If I unscrew something and I spill it, would that, if my dog ate it, would that kill my dog? Or,
Well, I wouldn't be spilling it. But no, I think they're quite inert buffers. They're quite safe. You obviously don't want to drink it or spill it on your carpet, but if you get it on your hands or anything, it's going to be fine. Just wash your hands, but there's nothing dangerous there.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, if you're at home and you're doing a stool sample, and what happens if you accidentally drop one of the tubes into the toilet, or you drop the little fecal catcher or something like that, something doesn't go right?
Well, that happens quite a lot more often than you think, Lisa. So you can contact the trial office. You'll have the email, you'll have the contact details, and then we'll simply mail you out another one. Okay. And once you've done it again, and if you drop it down the toilet again, we'll mail you out another one. We'll keep going until we get that sample.
That's great.
I think we're done.
Oh.
So what was the question about the saliva sample? Oh, yeah.
Okay, shy.
Okay. Kate, so how do the patients, I'll start that again because that's a bit rushed. Kate, can you talk us through the process of how the patients collect the stool samples at home?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Most patients, because they've got IBD, are used to collecting stool samples, but ours are a bit different, particularly the Omnigut tube. But all the instructions are in there. So there's diagrams, there's the written word, there's pictures. So if they're absolutely stuck, of course, they can contact the trial office. But the process is exactly the same as collecting any stool sample. So there's feces catchers, we give you that, we give you gloves, we give you a pooper scooper, and you do the sample in the feces catcher, and then you transfer it into our sample tubes with little kind of spade things, I guess you would call them, or ice cream scoops. So obviously you wouldn't use it for ice cream. And then you seal up the tubes and you put it, we've got a protective wrapping because it is going to go in the post. So you put it in the protective absorbent wrapping and then pop it in a plastic bag, in the jiffy bag, and then it gets posted to you in the lab, and then you do your thing with it.
Magic.
There. Your magic, sorry, of course, magic.
So I'm looking at the little saliva sample kit, and is there something that the patient need to think about when they do the sample?
Well, they do, because it does look quite straightforward. You're just going to spit into the little tube. Again, it's got a little bit of buffer preservative in it, so you have to be careful when you unscrew it. But then what you do is you wait at least 30 minutes since you've had anything to eat or drink, or if you've been smoking or eating chewing gum, and then you collect your saliva into the little tube. Now, it's only a couple of mils, and you think that's really easy, simple process to do, but it's amazing how mouth gets dry when you're told to produce saliva. So if you run your tongue along the inside of your mouth to stimulate a bit, then usually you can get a little bit more saliva. And then once you've got it to the mark, you just screw the lid on, again put it in protective padding and pop it in the post.
I find that I'm doing that now. I'm sitting here running my tongue. That's great, Kate. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time to talk about PREdiCCt.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.